welcome back to 50/50. I'm delighted to have Tasha Broomhall here today. I actually feel really honoured that you're here, Tasha. Like, I knew what you had done prior, but as you may have heard me say at other times, I'm now a bit of a researcher. So I have some interview questions, not the dark web. And really I was really struck by how much you've done, how much you've supported people. And personally, when I think of you, when we started Discern, which is 8 years ago now, you've had Blooming Minds for 17. Are we at the 17-year mark?
Yeah.
8 years ago we started Discern, and of course we were, anyone help? What are we doing? And I reached out. I don't know how we met. You might be able to help me because...
Was it Natalie Wallace?
No.
No. Okay. In my head, that's how we met.
Ah, who's Natalie Wallace?
Brilliant human.
Oh, lovely.
Someone I should introduce you to, obviously.
Okay, maybe we'll meet this way.
Oh, that's how I thought we met.
Yeah, so the thing that I remember is you, I was able to write an article for your Blooming Minds magazine. I think it's the single time I've been published. What a thrill. I had another look at it today.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I was promoting something at the time, very early days, and I remember asking if you'd share it for me, and you did. And I know that probably doesn't sound like a huge deal, but it really was. Like, it was actually very hard in the early days to get support, and I think Andy and I were a bit surprised how hard it was. And I really was struck by your kindness and generosity for me. And then when I looked again today and thought of the work you've done, I thought, wow, what a difference you're making and have made.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like huge, right?
Do you know what's really funny? So I just have come from having a meeting with one of my mentors.
Yes.
And I just had the reverse of this conversation with her around sharing things. So to me, that doesn't surprise me if you found that I shared stuff, because that just seems normal to me, right?
Yeah.
If you find good stuff, you want to share it with everyone you know.
Yeah.
Right? So I would have shared your stuff because I would have respected you and what you were doing.
Thank you.
But I was just saying to Anne that I'm surprised that that's not the norm. Like, I expected that. So I'm just doing some PhD research at the moment.
Yes.
And I've done a whole bunch of interviews, which has been fascinating, and now I'm trying to get this survey out there.
Yes.
And Anne was asking me how it's going, and I was like, not so good. And like, I really expected people would be jumping at this opportunity to tell us their stories.
Yes.
And they're not. And she was like, why? And I said, I don't know, but I tend to, anyone sends me a survey, I fill it in and I go, oh, who are the 5 people I think would also be able to participate? And I send it on to them, and then I remind them, have you done it yet?
Yes.
And I said, I naively just expected that's what would happen.
Yes,
and she was
course.
like, no, that's not what everyone does. And so if I shared your stuff, it wasn't anything other than that's just the way I think we should share things, right?
Yeah, well, I think
like, word of mouth is the best. If you're going to buy a new vacuum cleaner, what do? You ask your mates.
Yes.
Have you got a good one? Because I don't want to go do all the research myself.
No.
So if there's anything I find that I think is really awesome, then of course you share it. But I don't know if I'm just a bit weird sometimes.
Yeah, I think maybe, but weird in a very good way. So I will have the same experience you do, in that surprise when because when one has their own set of values, you think, well, we're all doing this, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed when I was reading your Blooming Minds website, one of your values, now have I got the word right, was it significant? So that, I love that word. I will tell you what I made up from it, and then you tell me what it really means, right? So for me, significant was what you do actually makes a difference. Is that
exactly right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a perfect way of saying it. And I think sometimes when you're in something and doing it yourself, especially for the length of time you had, I was thinking about just I don't know the right way to say it, just the amount of what you've contributed, the solidity of what you've contributed, and the length of time you've done that for. So there's a couple of different awards I read in your history, one around prevention of suicide. And when I thought of us talking today, I thought, oh, I could talk to you for really hours and hours and hours to gauge your experience and your expertise around what makes the difference to people, to work, to mental ill health, to workplaces. I just ordered your book, Ecosystem of Work, and there's a PDF that I downloaded from your website that I found, I think, originally on LinkedIn, then I couldn't find it. I went mental. Eventually I found it. Very pleased. Because when we have clients and they are dealing with different circumstances, and we have a really broad spectrum of clients, everything from the mining industry through to, as Andy said when I talked to him here, he said, you know, it really strikes me when I'm trying to find a dusty cup in the crib hut up on site to make a Nescafe coffee and then go to one of our accounting clients and use the on-tap sparkling water.
Yeah. Or their concierge comes and takes your order for the barista coffee.
Like that, right?
The first time that someone did that to me in a big accounting firm, I got out my credit card because
Oh, that's so beautiful. And what did they do? Go, oh,
yeah, no, they thought I was a bit odd.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. So I've got so many different thoughts in my mind. I don't know how to order it. And to be honest with you, and you're the perfect person to say this to, I'm a little bit premenstrual at the moment and I'm a bit anxious today. And I thought, what a deal having Tasha in as I'm scattered and premenstrual and so much I want to talk to her about.
Just be the same.
Yeah, right. So where shall we start? Where shall we start? So this actually isn't about me. The joy of doing it is about me and the outcome is about you. So I want to talk to you about what you're doing now. I want to talk to you about your PhD. I want to talk to you about ecosystem of work. I want to ask you questions about the industry and what you've seen, good and bad. I want to talk to you about starting blooming minds. What should I ask you first?
Maybe let's start with starting blooming minds.
Okay.
All right.
I saw a post. It's an old post. You were talking about your anniversary of the business and you said you rang your sister in Broome.
Yeah, okay, good.
Was that the start?
Yeah, that was, well, so there's a kind of a preamble before that. So
Okay.
I've been working in workplace mental health for 24 years.
Yeah, right.
So I started off working, so I studied disability first. I totally flunked out year 12, couldn't get into the psychology degree that I'd wanted. So went from, straight A student to family trauma, didn't finish high school in the fashion which I had started it. And very fortunately, the guidance counsellor had said you just have to put something on the form. And by the midpoint of year 12, it was clear I was not getting into psychology, which is the only thing I'd wanted.
Yeah.
So I still put it, but then I had to put something else because she knew I was not going to get into it.
Got it.
I was probably still in denial. And I put in this certificate of disability. I didn't know what it was, didn't really care, right?
Yes.
And that was what I got into. So I didn't get into the uni degree. I got into this TAFE certificate program.
Okay.
And it has been the foundation of all of the work that I've done since.
Oh, wow.
It's changed genuinely who I am as a person, how I engage with others, how I parent, how I wife, and definitely how I do my work, because we had some of the most amazing lecturers in that program that helped us just see ability. So it helped us see people have the right to live valued lives.
Yes.
Where they're living the roles that are important to them. And our opportunity as workers in that field was to connect with people and to co-design with them what that might look like and what supports might need to be put in scaffolding so they could live their best life. And that, to me, I don't think I've ever articulated it that way before, but as I'm saying it, it feels like the absolute truth of what I got out of that program.
Yes.
And then I went and travelled a bit and then I studied psychology. And my first professional job in a mental health role was in a service that doesn't exist anymore, but was, so it's a psychiatric vocational rehabilitation program, which means people who've got significant mental health conditions that the condition was impacting on their capacity to work.
Yes.
Seeing work as a model of recovery or a mode for recovery, and using work as a way of helping people engage socially, economically, professionally in the world, with sometimes significant barriers in the workplace. Think year 2000 is where I started there.
Yes.
there was a very different level of conversation
Oh, yes.
around mental health and mental health conditions.
Yes.
So sometimes our work was very quiet, so the workplace didn't know we were supporting the person outside of work.
Yes.
And sometimes it was a very fully transparent process. But I worked with people from, someone who was in a senior role in a hotel chain to somebody who was working at a pie shop to somebody who was collecting trolleys to somebody who was a mental health nurse.
Wow.
Who all had mental health conditions that were impacting on their capacity to work.
Yes.
And we provided some of that support and scaffolding. And in that job, there were lots of challenges within the service, so not necessarily in the service delivery, but within the services. You're doing really, hopefully, useful work.
Yes.
With really limited resources. And while the person who was the manager of the service at the time was really committed to raising our professional standards and giving us the training and support that we needed, it was a really under-resourced sector. And so it was very hard for us to be able to attract and retain people who were as skilled as you needed to be.
Yes.
So there were lots of challenges.
Yes.
And when I had my first son, who has just turned 20 earlier in the year, I realised I didn't want to go back to doing that kind of work because by then I was in a leadership role and there was all this controversy about you can't be in a leadership role part-time because that was the thought at the time.
Yes.
And I decided that I would just do something else. And I was given an opportunity to go and do some mental health first aid training, accreditation, and then to work in an organisation doing that. And then when I had my second baby, who's now 17, I realised that, there's just this beauty that you sometimes, those of us who are fortunate enough to have periods of maternity leave, sometimes your brain can actually do some of the busy work that you've been too fully booked to do. And so my brain went, why am I doing all this work to teach mental health first aid skills to prison officers to support the prisoners and teachers to support the students? Who's supporting the prison officers and who's supporting the teachers? And mental health first aid is quite a medical model, or certainly was. I know it's evolving, but that didn't really align with all of my beliefs and the understanding I'd come to. So I still love the program, but I feel it has a niche use. And I thought, I wonder what else could it look like? I wonder what else could there be? And so while I was taking some mat leave with Max, I went, well, I'm just going to see what it could look like and what it could be. And so talking to my sister on the phone one night, she was living in Broome and I was down here and we're both having a glass of wine, having a gin wag. And she's just a real believer and doer. So she was saying, well, just do it. And I was like, okay. And I'd been approached from a couple of people, while you're on mat leave, could you come and do this or this?
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, there's possibilities I can try this out. And so she came up with the name. And then 17 years later, here we are.
Come on.
Yeah.
So you said she was a doer and believer, but you must have also you have that capacity yourself?
So I sometimes benefit from the fact that I haven't thought it all the way through.
Yes.
And that I'm eternally optimistic.
Yes.
So on balance, I'm probably an optimistic realist.
Yes.
When it comes to other people, I'm a lot more of a realist. When it comes to myself, I just have this optimism that goes, well, okay, where do we go? What's next? How do we do it?
Yeah, beautiful.
And then get surprised when I don't have many survey respondents for PhDs. I'm like, oh, this doesn't make any sense.
I know.
So
I think it's I have the same approach and I like our approach better because you spend more time happy and less time disappointed.
Yeah, because as soon as I get to the disappointed, I'm like, oh, well, what do we do different?
Right.
What we've been doing obviously isn't working, so what's next?
Right.
But yeah, so I guess I'm a doer in that way. I think at times I can be too task-focused rather than person-focused. So I can become a bit of a bulldozer, and I certainly can see in the past that has been more of a feature, and so that doing has come with costs to relationships and to I guess the impact it's had on me and others in terms of just bulldozing, going, well, let's just do it. And I think that, now in my, I'd say mid-40s, my kids would say late 40s. There's no real defining number at which it switches, I don't think. I would say that I'm much better at not bulldozing, but that hasn't stopped the enthusiasm for the doing. It just is that I can see that it can be more beneficial to connect with people before the doing sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But I also get the sense when you say that you're, task-driven or bulldozing historically, there was a passion there. And what was the passion for? And is it the same as now? Has it shifted? The amount you create, the amount you serve, the amount you move, you change, but in the same sphere. But what's the most useful current way of doing that? As I look historically what you've done and how you've moved through the space you work in, but you clearly have a passion for something. Is it easy for you to articulate what is the fundamental thing that has you go, this is what we're going to do?
So you talked before about the business values.
Yes.
So excellence, significance, integrity.
Yes.
For me personally, the values are love, respect and compassion for self, others and the planet.
Yes.
And we distill that in our family till we talk about love and kindness. So if my 10-year-old was here, he'd be rolling his eyes going, love and kindness, yeah, right? Because that's what I talk about. I'm like, is that the most loving, kind thing you could have done there? Right? So I guess that's the underpinning drive is what does that look like in behaviours? What does love, respect, compassion look like in behaviours for myself or others, for the planet? And I definitely don't live them perfectly. And I definitely see that what it looks like in behaviours now at 48 is probably different to what it looked like in behaviours before.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that.
Yes.
But, I feel like if you're not at least a little bit embarrassed by your previous self, you probably haven't grown. Yeah. And so it's okay to go, oh, crikey, that's what I used to think that looked like? Ooh. Right? It's like when you watch shows now that you've watched a long time ago and you look at it with your now lens of the world and you go,
yes.
Oh, how did I love this?
Honestly.
Well, it's because you've evolved. That's a good thing.
And the world has evolved and
Hopefully.
at a real pace. We're starting to really hit a pace, right? Friends alone, rewatching Friends, I'm gasping.
Yep.
The racism, the thisism, the thatism. I'm like, this is unwatchable.
Yep.
And, it was a light, humorous.
Yep. I had that exact conversation with Anne this morning about Friends, about my kids' attitude to Friends as, 20 and 17-year-old boys.
Right.
Going, Mum, what do you mean this is a great show?
I know.
I didn't see these things before you pointed them out. Certainly didn't see them when I watched it when I was much younger. But
so what are we at now?
Okay.
Are we at 30? Is it as much as 30 years since Friends was at its height? I think it was a 90s show.
Is it?
I think. And when I'm working with people, as you can imagine, when I'm working with people on site, I'm working with people that have been in mining for 40 years and some of them struggle with the changes.
Yeah.
And, I'll say to them, even in the last 5 years, we've been with one of our biggest mining clients 6 years. The difference between now and 6 years ago is extraordinary. Yeah. In 6 years. It's like it's hit an exponential point, I think. And, of course, you've been... So when I hear you say, it's task-driven, love and kindness, I can feel how you would change the flavour of your actions over time, but the mission hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And then whether the language be mental health first aid or whether it move into psychosocial awareness, what's the outcome? Like when I read your ecosystem of work PDF, which I love and I'm going to share with clients, and then I'll see whether I can also sort of sneakily share the book with clear people that could make a difference once I've read it. I was thinking about that piece in there, that what is it all about? It's about respect, love, compassion, understanding. I was thinking about when I was going to see you today and everything I wanted to talk to you about, and I thought of the role that I play with clients, and I'm officially often called a leadership coach, right? So I did coaching at uni with Peter Slocum 17 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore, that graduate diploma.
Oh, right.
It's a shame. I wanted to do something. Coaching is so fluffy and what is that? And anyone can call themselves a coach. I wanted to do something that had a little bit of prestige and a little bit of, I did some learning, right? I did some learning to do this. But it's a limited world, and I'm meant to be helping people lead their teams, and I'm meant to help them think about how to communicate better. And I would say 80% of the people I talk to need help just to feel okay in themselves and in their environment day to day. And it's not unknown that we talk about leadership, but their own experience is often so difficult that I think the best thing I can do for them or the business is give them a level of, I run around basically loving people and appreciating them for what they do and trying to have them feel a greater level of solidity. And then, because I'm not trained in it, I recommend counsellors, I recommend psychs, I recommend the EAP in the business. It's actually the first time I've ever considered becoming a counsellor or broadening my skills because I can just see the need fundamentally. So when I think of you and I think of how you made me feel, or how when you share the generosity, that's what the feeling I get is of you are on a mission to bring, what were the words you lose?
Love,
I always
respect,
think love.
compassion.
There you go, love, respect, compassion. My 10-year-old is often the one that teaches me love, respect and compassion, particularly when I'm in, this show's called 50-50 for a reason. Like, I am delightful, Tasha, and a nightmare. I was literally sharing yesterday, we were talking about an escape room and we went for Sam's birthday and I was a monster. I got so overwhelmed by the competitive challenge of this escape room. I was barking at him, yelling at his father. I had to apologise to my sister-in-law for an escape room years ago because I realised what I'd been like. And Sam will go, Mum, bit harsh.
Yeah,
and he's how lovely to have this boy. He got a great. We had a parent teacher interview the other day, and he does very well at school. We're just really blessed with this kid, right? Anyway, as we're leaving, I said, "Do you think we say we're proud enough of you?" And he goes, "Yes, Mum." And I go, "Like, do you hear it enough?" And he goes, "Absolutely." And I go, "Like, why do you say that?" And he goes, "Because you tell me every day." And I go, "Good, excellent." I was like, "I want you to be bored with." Like when he was smaller, I said, "Anything else you want to talk about tonight, love?" And he was probably 5 or 6, and he goes, "Not that you love me." And I was like, "Yay, that's so awesome."
An abundance of love. You can't do better than that.
That's
right?
what I reckon, right? So we're running around as usual. My guests are always doing so much more than I am. So, whether it be you, honestly, like whether it be you or Peter or whatever, the scale of what you provide, the difference you make, I really mean that. I'm honoured. I think, wow, fancy having you here and what you contribute, right? But you and I are trying to bring love and kindness and compassion and thinking, how does this best come into play? So when you wrote the ecosystems of work and I looked at that PDF, for me, the communication involved, the check-ins, that was love, respect, compassion. How do you go with this corporate world of ours and communicating with leaders about what does that look like practically?
Well, that's a really good question. So I probably don't overthink it. I probably just try to hold space for it. So I guess one of my basic philosophies is most people are just trying to do their best they can.
True.
And there's all these barriers and curveballs that are thrown at us. But so if you've looked at the book, one of the quotes in that book is that behaviour is one of our strongest forms of communication.
Right.
So when someone's behaviour gets a bit wonky, we judge that behaviour. We make our own meaning of it and we judge and we either retaliate, get defensive, whatever.
Yes.
But instead, if we can become curious about behaviour as communication, we can stop just reacting to each other and actually go, interesting, and have more honest, compassionate, kind conversations.
Yes.
So one of the biggest things I think I've learned in my 40s is that it's about recognising you can't lead others until you lead yourself. So self-leadership is the basis of all leadership, I think.
Yes.
And I think our world doesn't necessarily set us up for that. It sets us up for smokes and mirrors.
Yes.
Photoshop versions of our life is what we're allowed to share.
Yes.
Which is why when you talked about this podcast and the idea being the 50-50,
Yes.
the glorious bits and the spiky, ugly, challenging bits, I love that, right? Because that's just authentic. That's how we all are. And what I have observed in my work is that we often look at other people's polished versions and compare our spiky versions against it.
Yes.
And I think that one thing that I try to do is break down that and get people to see, oh no, everyone's got some spiky stuff.
Yes.
That's actually just part of the richness of being human.
Yes.
And I think in the last few years, I've not kept the balance right always with living that authentically myself.
Yes.
So we've had some family health challenges with one of my loved ones that have been significant and impactful and literally upended our life and are not over. So, we're in a marathon, not a sprint. And in the early years of that, I really tried to compartmentalise that away and still be really polished looking.
Yes.
Not that I've ever been really polished, like I'm a curly redhead that gets, kissed by the sun and red and ruddy really easily. So I've not been a polished look in terms of presentation, but in terms of having my shit together.
Yeah, I think you would present as having your shit together. That would be a good summary.
But actually, I think we're all just holding our shit together, right? Like there's always stuff going on in someone's life. If it's not yours, it's someone close to you.
Yes.
And so a few years ago when I was on a quick road to burnout, I had to reset and just be really authentic in actually sharing the different bits of me and not pretending. Not because I was trying to set an example, but because I couldn't authentically cope with managing the complexities we were dealing with without doing that.
Right.
And what I have observed is that I didn't necessarily do that with as much grace as I should have.
Yes.
Or I could have rather than should have. Because for some people that was too much. So if you say to me, Tash, how you going?
Yeah.
I'll actually tell you how I'm going.
Okay.
Like, genuinely.
Yeah.
And not everyone's ready to hear that because how you're going is meant to be a greeting.
That's right.
It's meant to be a long form of hello.
That's right.
And so I have learned in the last probably 12 months how to hold both truths. So how to hold the truth of being authentic and not compartmentalising and pretending everything's great when it's not.
Yes.
But also not overburdening other people with that.
Yes, I can really understand that. And it's a wonderful topic for us today, both personally but also in what's coming up in the conversation I see more and more. So I've started sharing very recently with the encouragement of Peter Slocum and a fellow called David Westgate, who I don't know. He's on LinkedIn. His byline is something like bipolar 1 and thriving.
Yeah.
And he shares very authentically about himself and other people. I suppose his work is very much in the mental health space, and he's very clear about his own experience. I'm curious what it was like for you before you were sharing authentically. For me, I would share authentically, but I wouldn't share about my mental ill health, and I particularly was worried about sharing that I was medicated because I felt like it's going to undermine the work I do professionally. Because as I said in the interview with Peter, I said, look, I tell people what to do when I'm training. I give them advice when I'm coaching, and won't they just say, well, what on earth? You wouldn't know. You're mentally unwell and take drugs. Why would I listen to you? And even as I say that to you now, the nervousness hasn't ended. And when I said to David Westgate in my LinkedIn relationship with him, when I said, oh, thank you for sharing that, I think I will try and share, he actually said, which sort of shocked me because I'd already shared something, he said, just be careful who you share it with. And I went, I've already said it. And my gut is yourself, Peter, me, whoever it might be, particularly people like yourself and Peter that are known, admired, work in this space, it has to be good to share what's real. It has to be, doesn't it? Because when you said about the smoke and mirrors, when I think about the people that, and this trigger warning, because when I think about the people that, we had 2 people die at one of my clients by suicide, every comment about them was that they were social, happy, fun, generous. They had no one they could say, I'm not okay. And I can so relate to that. And I shared, I think, on one of our very early podcasts, I've been blessed with not having that level of despair, and I haven't come close to that. But I think the reason I haven't is I've always had someone I can say I'm not good. And fancy not having anyone you can say you're not good. And then, so that's the literal life exploding version, ruination of lives around that, apart from the tragic loss of the beautiful person. But then if you go whoop, like up the elevator of lightness and you're on LinkedIn or on Facebook and you're going, hey, man, I'm very cool and this is the cool thing I'm doing, I think that's all good. But I think if it is all smoke and mirrors and the pressure is to always look perfection, like I shared with you at the beginning of this, you can hear it in my voice. I'm anxious today. I'm delighted you're here, but my brain is a bit scrambled. I hope I ask you all the right questions and I really want to get the juice out of it. And when I focus on you, it helps a lot if I could take the noise out of here and go, look after Tasha and you'll be all right, right? But that was a very long way of saying two things. One, do you agree with me that the openness needs to get more open for people to feel just relieved in life in general? And secondly, before you started sharing, if I had to guess why you weren't sharing authentically, I would think, well, Tasha felt a responsibility to look together because she was helping people that perhaps weren't. And if she said, I'm not together, people would feel like you're not as reliable or not the person they can turn to.
I don't think it's that. I think that's a good guess, but that doesn't feel true for me.
Okay.
It wasn't a conscious not to share. It was both things can be true. You can be going through really, really hard, challenging stuff, and also things can be delicious.
Yes.
Like I have been so fortunate that I get to do work I really love, right? So I don't really have that many hard days at work. My work is just really interesting and fun and surprising, right? So when I was at work, particularly in the first few years with my loved one, work was a reprieve. Work was easy to be at compared to the stuff that was going on personally.
Yes.
So it wasn't a smoke and mirrors deliberate. It was that this is actually now a space I can just be.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
It does.
But there was also another thing, which is that as it did start to get to the point where I thought, well, I'm actually not okay. So I feel like I'm burning out. I feel like I've got carer's fatigue. I feel like this is all getting too much. And I felt that starting to creep into my work.
Yes.
It was now, if I was open, I'm not there training a group about me. It's not group therapy for me, right?
Yes,
I have boundaries that I'm there to present information and share knowledge and hopefully agitate conversations and curiosity in the group.
Yes.
But secondly, it wasn't my story to share. So my bit of it is only part of the story. But if I was to say to you, well, these are all the things that have happened.
Yes.
They're not my story to share.
Yes.
My bit is only one part of it. It would be breaching someone else's confidence in a big way, right? And because, I do a lot of work on radio and come onto podcasts and different things, if I'm sharing those stories, that's a big audience for somebody else's lived experience that it's not my story to share.
Yes.
And that's also not okay.
Yes.
So it was more about boundaries than smokes and mirrors intentional.
Yes.
And certainly in the early stages, it was just because my work was my happy place.
Yeah, you can hear it. And it helps me. It helps me with the nuance of these things, and it helps me with understanding. I had a girlfriend ring me on the way here and say, it seems like everything's really great at the moment. And I said, it is, and I'm loving doing this, and I think it's something that's going to be really wonderful for me and it's going to lead to other things or lead to this being something bigger. And I'm fractious today, I'm premenstrual, I'm anxious, and it's all happening, right?
And I think that's the story that we get to tell.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not about, and this is, I think, the balance I have found more in, particularly the last 6 months, but maybe 6 to 12 months, where I'm able to hold those truths that there are some really big challenges and there are some really delicious things. And the challenges I can acknowledge and be transparent without that being the focus of the conversation.
Yes.
And certainly I have had a couple of friendships that have not sustained through this period.
Right.
Because in the early stages, I couldn't share what wasn't just my story.
Yes.
And now that, you know, there is a bit more visibility in our life of what those stories have been,
Yes.
for people that know us personally,
Yes.
I then overshared to the point that I was just offloading, and I was asking people to hold a lot of space for me in a way that probably was not theirs to hold for me.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that balance that I am hopefully getting of being able to authentically hold those things in space. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that makes
it
sense.
really makes sense, and you can hear the movement over time of going, how much do I share, when do I share, how do I be responsible, how do I look after myself but also the other person I'm talking to. And as a professional in this sector, like you said, you know, I wouldn't stand up in front of a training room, anxious or not, and share that, because I'm there to do a job and I'm there to give information, and so I'll manage myself. What I'm trying to get better at is, like you said, holding the two spaces and holding I suppose the work has been holding the space that's vulnerable or frightened or anxious with a level of love and compassion, and not, you know, I used to do for the longest time, I still do it, but I'm trying to get better at, why are you like that? Don't do that. That you know, cut it out.
Yeah.
And of course it doesn't really like that. It doesn't help. It's actually already having quite a hard time. And I did mindfulness-based stress reduction a couple of times with Open Ground, and the first one was about maybe 12 or 13 years ago, and we had a wonderful woman whose name I can't recall, and she talked to us about the Thich Nhat Hanh idea around compassion, and, you know, you water your lettuces and you kill the snails, you don't yell at the lettuce because they're dying from lack of water and snails, right? And she used to say, you imagine this little part of you, this little squealing is like little piggy, like a little piglet, and it's upset and sad and frightened, and it's going, and she said, and then you hold your little piggy and you hug your little piggy. And it was such a funny thing to hear, and we were all laughing in the class, but I remember it, and it goes in and out, right? So being an analytical, intellectual kind of person that has, you know, comes from a critical past and has been critical and self-critical very much, the first thing to go to is cut it out, try and talk myself out of it. But every time I go, okay, it is a bit like that, right? Okay, you feel anxious. Okay, love, you're all right.
Yeah.
You know, you're all right. It's going to be all right. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can look after yourself. You can look after the other people you're with.
So it's that radical self-compassion.
Right? Softens the whole thing.
Yeah, because would you tell somebody else who is really anxious awful things?
No.
So sometimes we have to practice by, what would you say to your 10-year-old if they were experiencing that?
Yeah.
Or what would the person that you know loves you the most in the world, what would they say to you?
I know.
So I always imagine my granny's voice, right? Like if I'm giving myself a bit of a hard time, I'll go, what would Granny have said? Well, Granny would have done first. So she would have just grabbed me and pulled me in. She had this hook hug that she would give you, and she would pull you in and nuzzle in on her neck. And then she'd just tell me how wonderful I was and how everything was okay. And even when I go, yeah, but I said this, you go, yeah, and you're still okay, right? So we sometimes get to practice that radical self-compassion. And I think it's called radical self-compassion because it is radical. It is anti what our society is whipping up in us, right?
Yes.
So it's exciting if we can practice that with ourselves.
Yes.
Because from that compassion, we can stabilise and then we can grow.
Yes. And have the best chance of being compassionate with others, right?
Yeah. So that's why, going back to one of your questions earlier around the work that I do and one of the intentions behind my work, I just love having conversations with people about, you know, when someone's sitting there going, oh, and I do this and I've done this, I'm like, yeah, the last 20 people I've talked to have the same sorts of things going on, not to minimise this person's experience, but to go, oh, that's actually just humans.
Yeah.
We're all a bit messy.
Yeah.
And we'll have peaks and troughs. And you've got to enjoy that peak because there's going to be another trough, right?
Yeah.
So let's not lament it and overthink it. Let's enjoy where we're at and recognise that the sun will come again and things will get a little bit easier. But at the moment, if you're in a hard season, pull in your resources rather than beat yourself up about being in that hard season.
Yeah.
And I think, we can learn, we can grow, we can develop. And that idea that if you're not embarrassed from the things you used to know, then you're not growing. I had a beautiful experience at the beginning of this year. I was working with this big international mining group, and they had some staff fly in from international offices to work with this program we were doing. And, they all come in, they've put a lot of effort to get here across time zones and create the life space. And they come in, and I know they're not there because they've elected to be there. They've been told to be there, right?
Yes.
These senior leaders that have to learn this stuff. So there's sometimes a little bit of different energy in those rooms where they've been told to be there and it's been a big impost on their life.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to get the lay of the land and see where people are at and how invested they are in the process, or how much they're going to need me to acknowledge the effort they've put in at the beginning.
Yes.
And we're doing a bit of an intro chat, and this fella goes to me. So he said very gruffly, he said, I'm nearly 70 and I've been working for X number of years in this industry, and all this newfangled stuff that we're here to learn about is not how I grew up, is not what I learned, is not what's got me through my career.
Yes.
And now I'm here as an old dog who you've got a couple of days to teach some new tricks. I'm like, okay. And he goes, and I'm really open and I don't know what I don't know, but I reckon I'm going to walk out of here with a whole bunch of new skills, and I'm excited by that.
Whoa.
And I was like, whoa.
Oh my God.
That is not how I thought that conversation was going to end.
No, that
right?
ending was a great.
Yeah. So at the beginning, I'm sitting there steeling myself going, oh
yeah.
crap. He's like the second person to introduce themselves. This is only going to go downhill from here. But he changed the whole energy in the room.
Wow.
And it was beautiful.
Yes.
And I messaged his managers and raved them about him because, like, what a legend.
Oh, yes.
But he also just gave me this excitement that, you said it before, we're changing and evolving at light speed.
Oh, yeah, it is.
And it's not all good, right?
No.
But there is lots of exciting and good stuff. And when someone who has so much knowledge and wisdom from his life experiences is able to set that example and that tone, to me, that's really energising.
Oh, yeah, that's so exciting. That moment must have just been like, I can imagine being in that room going, okay, here we go, Bob. And then you're, woo! And you're like, oh, my God, I didn't know you were going to say that. That's so awesome.
It was really cool.
There's a couple of things I think as you talk. One is primarily a question. We're talking about this smoke and mirrors, looking good, all this stuff that people are always trying to do. Is it as simple as the whole cave person tribal not getting rejected? Do you think it is about that, or do you think we're being manipulated over time with social media and social norms? And why isn't it easier to be truthful about?
Just be.
Yeah, why isn't it easier to go? And I get what you say. Like, you don't want to always be saying to people, I'm shit, help me, because it's a bit of much, but want to be responsible. But if you're not great, is it okay to go, I'm not great and, or today's a bit tough and, or I'm a bit this and? Do we have to, I don't know, like there's a cliche, it's not a cliche, it's a story I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not, and they'll say the marriages in the most difficulty will have the most positive posts on Facebook about how much they love one another, and the most beautiful light dappled, everyone's always wearing white, I think, photos, right? And I can say in my broader life, in my experience of people, that probably is anecdotally true in my experience. But what's that all about, man? Like, that's one question. What is the fundamentals around not being willing to be open? And then the other one is actually more of a comment, which I suspect you have found this so often in your work. I get to meet people at a place that it makes me both very touched and very sad that other people don't get to see them like that. So because I come at people in my work with love and acceptance and that they're awesome, that's what I get to see. And I get to see what's worrying them. And they're just all gorgeous. It is I can't even think of the last time I hit someone, not literally, contact feedback.
I was trying to follow that.
Like in the old mining days, contact feedback, we don't do that now. HR, as one guy said to me. But yeah, that as I come at them with that, and therefore I get that back, and then I think what their relationships are with other people where neither person can play that for one another. They're nervous. They're both nervous. Like you said, their behaviours are coming out. I think, oh, how wonderful and an honour to see it. But I also feel sad because I'm like, oh, I got to see that, but no one's getting to see that, or one person or your wife maybe or your kids, but everyone else thinks you're a fractious, right? They're not. They just don't know how to communicate.
Well, they're just carrying some big load of something that has led to those behaviours escalating in some way.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know the answer. I mean, I know I don't know the answer. But I think that in terms of the work that we get to do, I have been really surprised in the last 5 years with learning that not everybody sees that. Like, I just thought everyone knew everyone had lots of crap going on, and that sometimes it's really pointy and sometimes it's not. And it has been a big eye-opener for me to see that other people going, no, but I really have some stuff going on. Everyone else is looking great and everyone else's life's great. And that was a big lesson for me to go, oh, no, like, we genuinely do see ourselves in a way where we're judging ourselves against other people's visibilities, whereas I had just thought, no, we all just knew it was messy.
Yeah, wow.
And maybe that's just me being, assuming that there's messiness everywhere. Someone might be listening to this going, I'm going to write into that woman and tell her, no, my life's wonderful and perfect and it is photoshopped. Like, rock on if that's your experience.
Yeah, how cool.
How cool. I'd love to come and research you.
Yeah, right? Like, we know,
what can I
get
learn
in
from
touch.
you?
Do get in touch.
But I think for most people, life is just, there's lots of complications, and
I
don't know.
I think that view that you have is so freeing for you and others. I do think it's unusual. I think for many people they're going, I'm shit and everyone else is perfect. And you know what, that when you said that blessing of that first training and then the career, I wonder if it was the foundation. Do you remember prior to that, even as a child, having that perspective, or do you think it's grown to understand, oh, now I know everyone's got the stuff?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think that I certainly have a lot more compassion and understanding for other experiences now than I ever did. I certainly have always been very curious, or as my mum would have said, very nosy. Curious is a nicer brand.
Yes.
But nosy is probably also true. I think I have had compassion in me for a long time, but I haven't always, it's not always been as activated.
Yes.
So I've been, certainly judgy McJudge face and a bit highly demanding of people at different times in my life. And I think that having had, the wisdom that comes through your 30s and 40s, and crikey, I hope through the rest of the decades.
Yes.
You get to know a bit more than what you used to know, and you get to see a bit more than what you used to see. So I don't know what my younger self necessarily knew and had. I just know what I have now, and that I didn't always have it to the same degree. But hopefully I also grow and evolve more, right? Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. This sort of, I also gave you two questions in one, so it was very tricky to answer it. So the first one was around, do you think it's our primal selves that allows us not to be vulnerable?
Yeah,
I don't know.
But
I like that as a theory.
I like it as a theory, but I think it's also, like most things, probably complicated, right?
Yeah.
I read the most brilliant little snippet of someone's story a couple of days ago, and he was saying how he's bought himself a non-smartphone and how his smartphone goes in the drawer and only gets used when it absolutely needs to, and the rest of the time his SIM card is in his non-smartphone, because who is he to fight against this billion-dollar industry that has designed smartphones to abdicate his decision-making and responsibility to whatever is going to give the biggest dopamine hit to his brain from the different apps and things on those devices. And I just loved that, because it's what I talk a lot about with people is, we need to remember these devices have off buttons. And he was like, no, the off button isn't even going to work for me. He needed to actually get a second device, that it takes a lot of effort to go and put the SIM card in the other one for those times he actually needs it.
Yes.
But I love that, because I think that's part of the complexity. Is it just primal? Maybe I don't know enough about evolutionary psychology to be able to answer that question. Is it about the busy world we're living in? Probably a combination of that. You mentioned social media, etc. in that question before. So maybe it's a combination of all of these things. But I always come to thinking of, okay, so whether we know the answers or not, we're here now.
Yes.
And what does next look like? What's our next step? And so I loved his example of his step is to actively disengage from a $1 billion industry that he can't actually fight against as an individual.
Yes.
So he's opting for something else. And I love that.
Yeah, it's clever.
Yeah.
Clever self-understanding, I think, and a strength of commitment to go, hang on, this is not working. I don't even want to admit this because I'm so ashamed of it, but only a couple of days ago Sam said to me, Mum, when you get lost in your phone, I'll say, Mum, and you don't hear me, and then eventually you'll hear me and you'll look up with this kind of glazed expression and go, yes, love, and then I'll say whatever I'm saying. I can tell when you actually engage, like you come out of your phone and engage. And then he said, sometimes you don't even realise, you'll go, yes, love, and your face will go back down to the phone. And I was like, it's only been in very recent times I've thought this is becoming a problem. His comment was a very painful reminder, guilt-ridden reminder. But I had got to the point, this is very recent, I got to the point, I'll do Wordle before bed, Duolingo, things like that, look at Facebook last time, whatever, and I noticed, I was like, what else can I press? And it was an addict's response, like when I used to smoke, right? What else can I press? Damn it, there's no more buttons. And then I'll re-look at something for no reason, and I thought, okay, we are now dealing with an addiction. And my child's reaction to that, we're dealing with an addiction. And when you said that fellow got a dumb phone, I'm like, is that the solution, or is it a timed solution, or is this we are at a point now. Open Ground, this people that I did MBSR with, and I'm going to do a 6-day retreat with in December. There's a lady that runs it called Timothea Goddard. Have you ever heard of her? She doesn't know yet, but I'm hoping she's going to be on here. She's one of those people, a bit like yourself, right? She's just does this work, Anyway, she did a course recently, short course you could do, and it was around disengaging from smartphones, being back to the present. Did I sign up for that course, Tasha? No, I did not, because I didn't want to be confronted with, but it was him saying, and I'm pointing upstairs because Sam's here, it was him saying, Mum, I can't always get hold of you when you're on your phone. I thought, that's despicable. Looney did a whole cartoon about it.
So you could spiral about it being despicable and shame, or you could have a compassionate approach and go, isn't that interesting? That's not living my values.
Okay.
I wonder why I've done that. And you might get to a similar answer as what this fellow got, which is, what is my brain against these billion-dollar companies that are designing things to seduce me into them? So what can I do about it? Can I fight the billion-dollar industry? No. Can I just opt for a different device? Yes. Will it be uncomfortable and awkward to change my behaviour? Yes. But do I have much more chance of changing it with a different device? Possibly, right? And you could do a little experiment of one on yourself.
Yeah.
But beating ourselves up and shaming ourselves isn't a great motivator for behaviour. Otherwise, we would all be living our best, healthiest lives,
God,
right? Because we shame ourselves constantly.
We literally had a live moment of what happens in my mind and how we could do it differently. And what it makes me realise is that the other happens in my mind, right? Like, oh, no, I'm not a good mum. Oh, how terrible that he said that to me. Okay, so let's flip it. I wonder what makes me look in my phone. Part of it's escapism. Part of it is exactly what you said. It's the whole thing set up by very clever, nerdy people to get hold of my brain.
To seduce you into it.
It's very seductive. It's very seductive. My husband does a thing with his where at a certain time it changes all the colours to black and white and you can't get into the good stuff.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very
He
clever.
does that one.
So when I used to do meditation sessions at my kids' school,
Yes.
So luckily my kid was happy for mum to come and teach meditation
Yes,
to his
that's a good
classmates.
start.
Phew. The current youngest kid would not be happy. So the 10-year-old Oscar would be like, oh, mum, how embarrassing.
Oh.
But Theo, as a 10-year-old, was quite happy for me to go in and do it. And I remember talking to them. So these were 10 to 12-year-olds, a little Montessori school, so little age group classroom.
Yes.
And I was talking to them about it, and some of them already had devices. And so we in our family, the kids aren't allowed to get a device till they're 15, and they have to pay for it themselves.
Okay.
So that's not necessarily a perfect system, because then when they're 17 and you think they shouldn't be on that device, they're paying for it themselves. So what do you do about it, right?
Yeah.
So it's not
tricky.
It's certainly not a perfect system at all, but that was just the system that we've generated. So I didn't really have much concept of how much some other kids were using devices and phones. And for some kids, absolutely essential tools, right? There were some kids that were travelling on public transport between different parents' homes if the parents were not living, cohabiting. So these were tools that were useful for them, you know, to be able to actually have that independence and travel. And so I get it. I'm not, you know, no judgment of parents that have chosen to go down that route. But what was really interesting was I remember the teacher talking to me about, you know, this is something that we're worried about kids' brains, and we think that maybe that could be a conversation. And so in one of the meditation sessions, we'd had the conversation about devices and when are they working for us and when aren't they working for us. And almost all of the kids, my kid included, talked about how, yeah, we actually can turn them off, but our parents don't. And so we did a little experiment when they went home for the week, and they had to do this little practice with no tech time during the evening, and they had to do it a few days a week. So this was the plan that they set up with me that they were willing to try. And they come back the next week, and it was not them that had struggled with it. They found it easy. But then it's just boring because mum or dad or whoever they're living with is actually still tied to their device.
Yes.
And maybe they need to do this as well. And, you know, kids are smart and courageous at making their observations, and so they were really open about it, and it was really interesting to me. And I've been thinking about that this week when there's this big national discussion around kids' access to social media and what controls we can put in there to stop children without any nuanced conversation of the complexities of the benefits some of those kids also get from this. But also no mirror being put up to us as adults.
Yes.
About, well,
hang on,
what are we doing with it? So it's tricky. There's not an easy answer.
No.
But I love the opportunity to go, so if this is what's happening for me and it's not working for me, what could I try? And just do little experiments of one with ourselves.
Yeah, and it's very interesting when I will use it or won't I, and when at times when I feel more relaxed, I intentionally won't do it and look around. If I'm on a train or a bus when everyone's looking at theirs, I'll just sit there. But other times when I'm at home, when Sam would like to talk to me, I'll be looking at it. So, yeah, as we're talking, I think for me personally, I'll figure out a timed system, couple of times a day where I'll check it, and then the rest of the time I don't look at it. So I'll probably have to put it somewhere else or maybe give it to Sam.
I had this colleague, years ago, who he had 2 teenage daughters, and he said they're just constantly on their phones, and I know that they're now getting to their late teens and I've got borrowed time with them. Like I want to spend more time with them. So we did this little chat and tried to figure out what things he could try. And so we came up with this idea that he was going to try to have 2 tech-free nights a week.
Okay.
Right? And so he was going to impose that on the whole family. So he was like, I still pay for their devices. They're young enough, I can do this. And so they negotiated as a family which those nights would be. And I remember talking to him about a week in, and he was like, it's not going well. And so he had this system where at 6 o'clock on those 2 nights, he would come home from work, he'd put his phone in his jock drawer, and that's where the kids also had to put their phones at 6 o'clock. And one of his teenagers made them all put it in a pillowcase because she was like, Dad, it's your jock drawer.
I was going to say, there is a repelling factor there.
But there was also a factor that was meaning she was probably not going to go back and get it so quickly, right? So
True.
probably
Good
clever
point.
drawer.
Clever.
But she put it. They put it in a pillow slip. Anyway, I think he had these utopian views of this just family bliss that they were going to sit around and play Trivial Pursuit and different things. And he said all they did every night, it was Tuesday and Thursday night, was just argue for that first week.
Okay.
And he said, they're trying to wear me down. I was like, are they going to? And he was like, I don't know. And I was like, let's see. And so then I remember about a month in and he's like, well, we're not arguing all night now, but we're still not actually doing games night. And I said, well, I didn't think games night was what you'd negotiated with them. He was like, no, but that's what I thought would happen.
Yeah.
Bless.
We naturally do
expectations.
games. Yeah.
And then a couple of months in, he was like, no, it's actually just working. It's just working. And it's not, they still weren't doing games night.
Yes.
But he said it's interesting the conversations we're having. People are sitting at the dinner table for longer and we're actually talking about things and it's actually this different thing. And it didn't have to be all the time. So, you know, you said, I might just check it a couple of times a day. If you're using it at the moment to the point that Sam observes that, is that a lofty goal to go to just checking it a couple of times a day? Possibly. Like we're really good at creating lofty goals.
We really are.
Right? But are you familiar with BJ Fogg's work?
No.
Brilliant behavioural psychologist. He's got a great newsletter, definitely worth subscribing to. So he has a book called Tiny Habits. You may have heard of the Atomic Habits. Yeah, I like BJ Fogg's version.
Okay.
He's a researcher, great science communicator. And so he would say, well, going down to a couple of times a day, I don't know if he would say this, but looking at the content in his book, he would say, don't create the big lofty goal.
Got it.
Create the little itty bitty goal.
Okay.
So the little itty bitty goal might be, when Sam gets home, you're going to put it away for an hour.
Got it.
And not look at it for that first hour with him.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
And if that's too much, then maybe it's just every second night you're going to do that. You know what I mean? Like, how do we create goals for ourselves that are more realistic? Because then we get the wins and you get that same hit of, oh, I've done it. That's awesome. That's exciting. And then you can grow and develop it from there.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. That's very good. And I'm a very lover of lofty goals. They've often not worked. It's very good to do this other one, right? Very, very nice. So there's two things I definitely want to ask you about while we're talking today. One is about your PhD and one is about, forgive me for the title of it, it's the work you're now doing with people where they join you for a year and become champions in their business of psychosocial safety.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. Can you help me with what that is, what it's called, where it came from and how far into that process are you?
Yeah, so we have a program called the Blooming Minds Mental Health Champions program. And so we'll work in organisations around a systems approach to creating psychological health and safety, so which encompasses the psychosocial safety around the design and management of work, also looks at how do we recognise and respond to people when they may be having challenges and how do we look after ourselves.
Okay.
And that work evolved from me getting to a point probably about, so when did I do my TED Talk?
2013.
I think Oscar was born 2013. It was published, I think I did it 2011.
Oh, wow.
Right? So I'm trying to think, I wasn't pregnant with Oscar when I did it. I think that was the year before. So 2011, 2012.
Okay.
Maybe 2012. Yeah, maybe 2012. Anyway, when I did it, the same event, Ernesto Ciroli, this brilliant, enigmatic Italian brain and heart, also did a talk. And I just fell in awe of his work and then did lots of reading around his work and connected with some people here who did a lot of work with him. And it was all around community development work. And I'd gotten to this point where, you know, sometimes you get brought in as a trainer to work for one day, couple of days with a group. You see that person from the room 6 months later in Woolies and they go, hey, you ran that course. And you go, yeah, hey, have you used anything or have you found it useful? And they go, no, I loved it, but I got back to work the next day and I was busy. I just haven't thought about it again until I see you.
Yes.
And before you know it, you're crying into your cauliflower in Woolies, right? Because you're like, I'm just giving a lot of effort and I'm not actually helping in a meaningful way, right? And so I got to this point where I felt like, sometimes I feel like people bring us in for tokenism.
Yes.
So they can say they've done this.
Yes.
But I don't feel like I'm honouring people's time and energy in that room if we're not actually helping them create change.
Yeah.
And so I really struggled with this. And I then discovered Ernesto's work. And his work is all around how do you actually help people by holding a space for them to design, or at best you co-design, right? And so doing that in really meaningful ways. So I went down this rabbit hole of research of, well, what could that look like in my work area? So he does stuff on big community development level, and that's not the work that I had been doing. So I was looking at, well, what could that look like? And then we started working on these models of something bigger at a program level to look at the systems in workplaces rather than just those, box ticking, or at best bite-sized opportunities. Right? Box ticking at worst, bite-sized opportunities at best. And then I started developing this more holistic program. And I think in 2019 was when we did the work to do all of the development and publish it. And we had someone that wanted to buy it in 2020, and then COVID hit. And we had to recalibrate really quickly to make what was going to be an in-person program for a couple of weeks, all of a sudden go to online, because it was for an organisation with people across the state. And we're so fortunate that we did, because that's been the strength of it, is that we now have this ongoing community. So that particular group has just entered its 5th year in that organisation, and it's a culture of peer support model. So it's not peer support as in, there's one person in your organisation who's the peer supporter that takes responsibility, or a couple of people. It's how do we get some knowledge and skills and then spread those knowledge and skills throughout the organisation to change behaviours. So it's a real capacity building program. And it's just some of the most delicious work that I get to do. We've done it with an organisation, an international organisation, who had staff in 37 countries around the world. And I just remember my first night working with them being, so it was middle of the night here for my time zone to meet all the other time zones. And I'm sitting there in my pajamas and my slippers and a work top and earrings, because I figure on Zoom, as long as you've got earrings, you're fine. And I remember sitting there being really nervous. Would some of the underpinning frameworks that I use, would they actually translate? Because English is the only language I barely speak. But for many of these other people, it was a second or third language. And it was so awesome to see within a couple of minutes, I'm talking about this particular underpinning framework, and this fella up in Russia goes, I think what you mean there is, and he just made this sound. So I was talking about languishing, and he goes, I would just say that's blur. And I'm like, yeah. And then someone else in another country goes, oh, yeah, I think of that as meh. And then we have this conversation about all the sounds, right? And I suddenly realised, actually, people are just people. And we all have a sense of what it's like to not be feeling our best and to be struggling and to be overwhelmed at times. And we can all actually also see the possibility and the hope of recovery from that, right? And so that particular program, we are now looking for funding to do on a large scale in a community. And actually, we've got a film crew that will work with us to actually film it, and then we can use it as a model. And it's based on evidence and research around what can work to help us have that community culture of peer support and that overarching psychological health and safety, which is about looking after ourselves, supporting each other, and how do we design things for meeting everyone's needs.
God, it's so exciting.
It's really exciting.
So exciting. That thing you were talking about, that's been so much of my experience, particularly when I was a contract trainer, and you'd put in all your heart and soul into this day. And an old manager of mine many years ago said to me, people come to training and it's like a bucket full of water with a hole in the bottom, and as they leave, the water drains out. And I'm like, correct.
Soul destroying, isn't it?
Terrible.
Yeah.
And so when we did discern, we started to take action around, shorter sessions, ongoing sessions with coaching in between social sessions. Like, how do we make this? Because that thing, I just didn't think to do it when I got back, particularly because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is challenging for people. Assertive comms, giving feedback, listening well, being vulnerable. It's very easy to find excuses not to apply it when one gets back to work. So we've tried to look at some of those elements, but when I think about what you're doing, it's kind of the role I feel that we play in one of our companies at a small level ad hoc. So it's over time, it makes a difference over time, doesn't have the scale that would make the biggest difference. It's like the little, I don't want to say Band-Aid because it's kind of diminishing, but it is a bit of a sort of vein of goodness and support that we are able to provide. And when I think about what you're doing, it's like, wow, that could be holistic, that could be everywhere. And then those people that I see and love and know who they are would be freer to be who they are. And when they bump into the next person, instead of getting the prickles, they'd be able to go, oh, I know that you're awesome because I'm able to access you now, you know?
So that leads us to your other question, which was about the PhD research. So that systems work that I find really fascinating is where I've then embedded my PhD research. So looking at, we're 18 months into the psychosocial regulation changes here in WA.
Yes.
What are organisations doing with it?
Yes.
Are they box ticking? Are some just not even talking about it yet? Yes, the answer to both of those.
Yes.
Or are there organisations taking systemic approaches? And yes, is the answer there as well. So there's a wide range of different approaches being taken. And my research is exploring how that affects employees' experiences. So if you're an employee and it's just having the box ticking approach, what does that look like and feel like for you?
Yes.
If you're an employee that your workplace is still not even talking about this at all, what does that look like and feel like for you? And if you're an employee that your organisation is taking that systematic approach, what does that look like and feel like, and what do you see that other organisations could learn from that?
Yes.
So that's where my research is focused.
And how far into your PhD are you?
Years. Enough that I have friends that send me these really horrible memes about, how long does a PhD take? It's like, well, it takes a long time because I run a business.
I was going to say.
I'm a mum and,
Yes.
a wife and an actual human myself.
Yes.
And so I'm really hoping, the goal was to submit by the end of this year.
Oh, wow.
And I've done all the interviews and collected the qualitative data, and the survey was not part of the original design, but an extension of that original design that I thought would actually just be another way of saying what we've seen in the qualitative interviews, does it actually play out on scale?
Yes.
So I thought the survey would be a way to do that.
Yes.
So naive, because it's actually been really much harder to get survey respondents than it was to get the qualitative interviews, which I'm gobsmacked by.
I'm curious
about the experience.
I'm curious about the anonymity of the survey. Do people need to say where they work?
No, it's totally confidential. We don't ask you your name. We don't ask you where you work. We just ask your industry.
I had a very neat answer for why the survey hadn't kicked off, but now I've lost it.
All right,
Because my thing was, what I noticed was because of a lack of psychological safety, which is pervasive in a lot of places, when I would ask people, for help when we first started Discern or whatever, I'd say, oh, could you speak to your HR person? I was like, they'd get a wide-eyed, oh, no, Lord, I'm not sticking my head above the parapet and I don't even know if you're any good. It was real panic stations.
Yeah.
But it's not that. So is it so how's this? Sam goes to a Montessori school.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, he goes to Treetops in Darlington.
Oh, beautiful.
And I'm on their board, which is a real pleasure and a fascinating thing for me as a new experience. But when we were looking at the different things that parents wanted, one of the things that came up was that they wanted more community activity. So things they could attend, after school things, dances, barbecues, food trucks, all those wonderful things. But one of the areas that we came to in the conversation was, as a community, much broader than his school, we're finding that people are less likely to take charge of things themselves. So they're less likely to create the thing. They're less likely to volunteer to be the person that kicks it off.
Right.
It's a very tenuous link I'm drawing, but I'm wondering if there is a cultural thing now with the busy, with the distracted, with the social media time we need, plus Netflix, Tasha. We haven't even talked about the commitment we need to that. I wonder, I'm curious for you. I'm two things. One, I'm curious for you, and the other is I want you to get the survey results you need.
Too.
So, do you think that cultural aspect could be at play unexpectedly?
It could
What do
be.
people need to do if they want to help you?
Do you mean for the survey?
Yeah.
Like literally just fill in the survey. It's about 5 minutes, totally confidential, online, anonymous. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm
So
even
now
more
I'm just
getting your
trying to think-
surprising
Yeah,
around.
right. But so I'm just trying to process what you just said. Maybe you might be onto something. That might be why. I think that there might be another contributing factor, which is that because I've worked in this space for a long time, ethics requirements mean that I've had some boundaries put around
Yes.
the research, totally appropriate,
Yes.
which means I can't actually ask people that have worked with me as a client or who've been employed in my company to do the survey. So I am that person that if I see a survey, I just think, I've been part of this longitudinal survey since I was a wee little kid, right? That they come to you every few years. And
come on.
So that's
Are you
just
like
in
the
my
7 Up?
DNA, right? Similar but not.
Wow.
But that's just something that is normal to me.
It is, yeah.
Because I've had that exposure. I had lots of health issues as a kid, so Mum put me in this study when they asked us to, and, that's just been a long-term experience. So I had wrongly assumed it would be easy to get people to participate.
Yes.
So maybe it's part of what you're saying in terms of busyness. But I think another barrier is because the people who I work with that have, many of them said, hey, I'd love to participate.
I'll do it.
Actually are not eligible.
So the people that love and know you the most can't help. We've hit our first barrier.
Right? But what I have noticed is when someone who wants to support me says, so I had a girlfriend do it yesterday, she said, I will promote it to 20 people.
Yeah, like that.
And I was like, oh, that's incredibly generous, right?
Yes.
Like, how cool is that? That's where the responses then trickle through. When someone has said, hey, this person's doing some work that I find important and I would love for them to be able to capture stories like yours. Would you be willing to participate?
Yes.
And I've had a couple of the interview participants, amazing humans with really rich, fascinating experiences who have done the same. They've said, so we're using this snowballing technique where you find people who meet the criteria and then you ask them, do you know someone else who might also have a story to share?
Yeah.
And that has been rich. But beyond that, it seems to be one person recommending it to one other person, and that's when we get it. So which is much different than I thought.
Yeah, I get that, and I can really get that. I've had that experience a few times in my life. You go, what now? I thought this was going to be, hang on.
But this is the bliss sometimes of my ignorance, is that I don't know what I don't know. And so I just go, well, let's try. And then I'm too far into it to actually stop.
I'm a total believer.
So I have to figure it out, right?
It's how I live my whole life. I'm not going to help you out of that one.
So
I'm
then
like,
I have
keep
to
going.
figure it out. And that's probably good, because if I'd known how hard it was going to be, I probably wouldn't have started.
Andy said to me, we come back from South America. I've got a young child. We've got no money. And he goes, let's start a training business. And I go, okay.
Sure.
That's literally what happened, Tasha. Okay.
That's so brilliant.
No analysis, no thinking. That's how we started this.
How you get things
Danielle
done.
and I had lunch. I go, I think I'll do a podcast. She goes, oh, what is podcast studio? I was like, oh, my God, miracle. Here we go. Off we go. So, look, I just don't think there's any other way to live.
Good, I like that.
And then what's going to happen is you come on here, I go, this is the way I can thank you for being on here. Let's figure out how to get this survey result. Now, who can do it? Like, how do you become eligible? What's the kind of subject matter? And 2, how many do we need to get done?
Yeah, so I don't have a concrete number, but I need in the hundreds.
In the hundreds?
In the hundreds.
Okay,
yep. We're still doing the mathematical analysis to try to figure out the exact number, but it's definitely in the hundreds.
Okay.
So to be eligible, you need to not have worked with me as a direct client, not have been in one of my training courses or programs, not have worked for me as a staff member.
Yes.
You need to be aged over 18.
Yes.
And you need to have been employed in Western Australia in the last 18 months. Right? So hence why I thought it was a big pull.
It's a big pull. It is a big
people
pull.
in this state that are employed and that I haven't worked with.
Yes.
So that's the criteria. And then if you have, do you have show notes for this?
Yeah.
That we could give you the link.
Yes.
And then it's just literally link through there, read the the criteria and, click to say, yes, I meet that criteria. And then you're on your way. 5 minutes later, you'll be done.
Awesome.
There are some open-ended questions. Some people choose not to answer them. Done in 5 minutes. People who choose to answer them, it'll take you as long as you determined to invest in answering those free-form questions.
Okay, awesome. And what's our time limit on the need for them to come back?
Yeah, so that's the big question because it depends on how many I get before I can use the data.
Okay.
So actually,
it's chicken and egg, is it?
It really is because we've got a few, we've got 51 responses as of this morning.
Okay.
That's not enough.
Got it.
But I also don't want to discount continuing the survey and not including those 51.
Got it.
Because they're important stories.
Right.
I had somebody who actually sought me out via email because we have to put our email address on the flyer.
Yes.
So she'd finished the survey and then went back to the flyer, got my email address and sent me the most beautiful email about how it had been a therapeutic process for her to have a safe place to share her story and her experiences, right? So I don't want to discount that and the time that people have taken and go, oh, it didn't work, the qualitative data is enough. I want to give it the time for the survey to work. I just haven't figured out yet how to do that yet.
Yeah, okay.
So the end of September was my original date where all of the data collection was meant to be finished.
Yes.
We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, I'm literally going through my head, who do I know? I really need to get to know some more famous people. Hugh Laurie. Hugh, call out every podcast. Love you. So Grayson's selfishly in year 12. So he's in the room with us.
Rude.
Oh, I've got to finish year 12.
And it's all about him.
Honestly. Anyway. The reason I'm saying that is one, to disgrace him because it's fun because he can't say anything back. He could play a noise now though. Don't do the fart noise.
I mean, he could edit us really badly.
He could do whatever he wanted.
He has a lot more power than we are presuming.
I apologise unreservedly. Please don't do anything to us. Tasha's an innocent victim in this. Do it to me.
If you need to. So the reason I said that is I want to get this out as quick as possible, the PSA about your survey, but because of Grace in year 12, this interview's in a queue. It's not going to come out for weeks. So what we're going to do is we'll be able to say, and in this show you'll notice that we're talking about this thing, which since then has been resolved and we've got the numbers we were after.
Yeah, or we'll just edit it out.
Or we can edit it out. No, but let's go with our optimistic version.
Okay,
I know you've had a bit of a tough time with it, so you're finding it hard to, but let's just not give up hope yet.
No, it'll happen.
Right, let's do it. Yeah. I'm really thinking now. I was thinking about, we were talking about social media and there's a lot that doesn't work about it. And one thing that has really worked is in the year of COVID, I created a little Facebook group, private group. Andy, my husband, cleverly called it 3 Little Birds, like the Bob Marley song. Yeah. 3 Little Birds sat at my doorstep. And I created it because we were all frightened and didn't know what was happening in COVID.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people are in it, 75 or 80 wonderful people around Australia and international. And because of the love in my Facebook feed, all my algorithms are set up for love, and so all I get is poetry and wishes for people, and it's so beautiful. And I was saying to a friend yesterday, there's a very famous international poet called Mental Blank, Donna Ashworth, I think her name is, wonderful. John Rodell, another fellow, and I get these poems sent through, and you read this poem. And they're so beautiful, just this moment of beauty. So why am I saying that? I suppose because as we talk about getting your survey done and the difference you're making and our confusion sometimes around how everyone's operating and, this background of love and commitment and beauty, right? Like as you sit with me here, I think really you're like this sort of, I don't know the right language to use, like stable or solid or reliable, like you're not mucking around in this space you work in, and that provides a whole thing, right? It provides a whole ability for people to access what you can offer, respect your experience, get something real, like that's significant value, man, right?
Thank you. It's really funny because listening to you talk about my work is really different to living doing the work.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have to say we just do a really little bit of work. We've got a really great team of really lovely people, but we do a little bit of work, and there's a lot of work to be done in this world. And it's, I hear a lot about people when someone reflects like that and says, oh, we just do this little bit, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
We sometimes jump to assuming they've got imposter syndrome, and I don't feel like I have that, because I feel like, no, I actually know that I do some good stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also know that it's one tiny wee little bit in really complex lives and complex organisations and a complex world.
Yes.
And I'm quite grateful that I get to do this little bit.
Yes.
Like, we've just done a new intake of the Champions program with one of our clients, and it has got to be the hardest I work all year for that 2 week of the education program.
Yes.
And it's the most fun I have all year.
Yes.
And I go to bed devastatingly tired and happy every night, and I just love getting to meet these people that care enough about creating an awesome place to work that they put their hands up to be really open to learning what they don't yet know.
Yes.
And I love that. And what they teach each other and what I get to scaffold them with is really a delicious experience. I feel like I have to sometimes think, am I having too much fun with this? Like,
I know.
Am I also thinking about what I'm meant to be delivering? Because it is just so delightful. And with all of that, I still know it's just a very, very narrow lane that we play in.
I know.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, right. So I totally agree. You don't have imposter syndrome. You come across as who you are, and you come across confidently as that, which I think provides something, right? You go, okay, good, you got it. Plus, I don't have to yell at you like I had to yell at Peter because, you get it, right? But I do have to challenge you and not challenge you. I completely agree. In a world of 8 billion or whatever we've got now people, what you can possibly do is going to be considered small. But my Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, one life has breathed a little easier because you have lived, then that is to have succeeded.
That's beautiful.
There's a lot of breathing going on, Tasha. And it
thank
wasn't
you.
one life. So then connected to that, 2 things. One, don't stop getting bigger because you'll have bigger impact. You won't be able to help yourself anyway. I don't even need to encourage you. But the other part is this little thing is everything. One person who didn't kill themselves, one person who didn't abuse their partner when they got home, one person who said to themselves, you're not a piece of shit because you're on Facebook, you're a dopamine addict who's just a human being and you're not as clever as Mark Zuckerberg and his minions.
That's a long thread. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like that,
if we can just have that self-compassion for ourselves.
That's a big deal for me, Tasha.
It's a massive big deal, yeah.
It's a big deal. Like I'm sitting here going, you're the worst mum in the world, rah, and Tasha goes, hang on, let's stop that whole train. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even realise I was doing it for one. Yeah. And now I can look at this whole thing differently. And because you said, hang on, like, could be a bit more gentle, I go, that'll come up for me lots of different ways. So, and then I'm on here running around the world talking to people. It's not that little. I know I get a bit bossy when people, and I know you know what you're doing, but I kind of want you to see it through a little bit of a different lens because you'll be a future-focused what's next person. You have to be from how you've been. That's fine. And I really want to say thank you for the impact that you have.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's very nice.
It's very true.
Thank you.
And I'm glad it was nice too. Yeah, fancy being, one of the kindest people I met when we were first starting, and we haven't had much to do with each other over the years apart from nice little interactions now and again. And that flavour of you for me has had an impact through these last 8 years, right? All right, Tam, let's catch up for coffee. All right, let me put you in my magazine. All right, I'll share your course for you. And I was like, one person's done it in the hardest year.
Well, I'm very grateful that I was able to do a little bit of spreading for you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What have we missed? Have we missed anything?
I don't know, but I just love the fact that I had no idea what you were going to ask me, and it's been really fun to have a chat.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good, because I always check with people prior, what would you like to get? And you said it would be nice to have a conversation that's not bite-sized or, you're asked for your opinion in lots of ways, but briefly. And as you can tell, I go all around the houses, which largely works because of the cleverness of my guests, right? But, I think I think people will get a lot from this conversation just hearing your perspective on these things that are the most important elements of being a healthy, happy human, right? That just can operate in this world in a way where they can see things as clearly as possible and suffer the least. You know?
That's awesome.
Cool.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here.